Picture a quiet room, the kind where shadows seem to whisper secrets. You're sitting there, alone, but not quite. Something stirs in the air, a pull you can't name. It's not love, not desire, but something deeper, older, like a memory you didn't know you carried. This is the story of the empath and the narcissist, a dance not of chance but of destiny, woven into the fabric of the psyche. It's a bond that feels like fate, yet it's forged in the unseen corners of the soul, where wounds call out to wounds, and the heart reaches for what it thinks will make it whole. The empath, you see, is not just a person, they're a vessel for feeling, a tuning fork for the world's unspoken pain. They don't just hear your sorrow, they absorb it, let it seep into their bones. This isn't mere sensitivity, it's a psychic gift, or perhaps a burden, inherited from archetypes older than time, the healer, the seer, the one who carries the weight of others' shadows. They walk through life sensing what others bury, the grief behind a smile, the fear beneath bravado. And in this hyper-awareness, they often lose something crucial, their own edges, their own boundaries. Now, enter the narcissist. Not the cartoon villain twirling a mustache, but a soul in disguise, cloaked in charisma or quiet charm. They're not evil, they're fractured. Behind their polished mask, whether it's grandiosity or subtle superiority, lies a void, a hunger they can't name. The narcissist doesn't feel the world the way the empath does, they can't. Their pain is locked away, hidden even from themselves, replaced by a persona that demands attention, admiration, control. Where the empath gives, the narcissist takes. Where the empath bends, the narcissist stands rigid. And yet, these two are not opposites, they're mirrors, reflecting each other's deepest lacks. Why do they collide? The unconscious, that vast and unseen ocean within us, seeks balance. It doesn't care about happiness or logic, it craves wholeness. The empath, in their boundless giving, often denies their own needs, their anger, their ambition, their right to say, enough. This denial creates a vacuum, a space that pulls in the narcissist's unyielding demand. The narcissist, meanwhile, buries their vulnerability, their need to be truly seen, and finds in the empath a wellspring of validation they can't generate within. It's not a meeting of souls, it's a collision of shadows. This dynamic isn't random. It's archetypal, a script written in the psyche long before either was born. The empath senses the narcissist's hidden wound, the frightened child beneath the bravado, and believes, without knowing why, that they can heal it. They pour themselves into the narcissist's emptiness, not with logic but with instinct, as if answering a call from the deep. And the narcissist? They're drawn to the empath's light, not to cherish it but to consume it. The empath's empathy becomes their supply, their fuel, their mirror. But here's the paradox, the empath feels the danger. They sense the imbalance, the slow erosion of their own spirit. Yet they stay. Why? Because the pattern feels like home. It echoes something ancient, something unresolved, a wound passed down through generations, a belief that love means sacrifice, that goodness means enduring. The empath doesn't just fall for the narcissist, they're summoned by them, pulled by a force that feels like fate but is really the psyche's cry for integration. This isn't about romance gone wrong. It's about the soul's journey through projection and pain. The narcissist isn't the villain in this story, they're a catalyst, a mirror showing the empath what they've yet to claim, their own power, their own boundaries, their own right to exist without saving someone else. The tragedy is not the attraction itself but the cost of staying in it, of believing that love can fix what was never whole to begin with. The empath's descent begins here, in the moment they mistake possession for connection. They give, until they're hollow, until their own voice grows faint. And yet, within this descent lies a seed of awakening, not for the narcissist, but for the empath themselves. The question isn't how to escape the narcissist. It's how to reclaim the soul that keeps calling them back to the same wound. The air grows heavy now, charged with a quiet electricity, as if the soul itself is holding its breath. You felt it before, that moment when someone looks at you, and for a fleeting second, you believe they see you, truly see you. For the empath, this is the hook, the moment the narcissist becomes not just a person but a mirror, reflecting back the image of who the empath longs to be. It's not love at first sight, it's recognition, a spark that feels like destiny but is really the psyche playing a dangerous game. In the early days, the narcissist is a master of illusion, not because they're cunning, but because they must be. Their survival depends on crafting a persona that dazzles, that draws others in. They sense the empath as yearning, not consciously but instinctively, like a predator smells blood in the water. The narcissist doesn't see the empath as soul, they see a need they can fulfill, a void they can exploit. And so, they mirror back the empath as deepest longing, to be enough, to be chosen, to be the one who heals. The empath feels seen, not because the narcissist knows them, but because the narcissist reflects their idealized self. This is the seduction, and it's intoxicating. The empath, so used to giving, suddenly feels received. The narcissist's charm, whether loud or subtle, feels like a spotlight, illuminating the parts of the empath they've hidden even from themselves, their worth, their beauty, their goodness. But this mirror is flawed. It's not a reflection of truth, it's a projection, a carefully curated image designed to pull the empath closer. The narcissist doesn't love the empath, they love what the empath provides: validation, energy, a stage for their performance. And then, the shift begins. The mirror distorts. The narcissist, once so attentive, starts to withdraw, to demand, to critique. The empath, who felt so seen, now feels invisible, their light dimming under the weight of expectation. They try harder, give more, believing that if they just love better, sacrifice deeper, the mirror will shine again. But it doesn't. The narcissist's hunger is insatiable, not because they're cruel but because their void is bottomless. They can't give what they don't have, and what they lack is a connection to their own soul. The empath, meanwhile, is caught in a trap of their own making. Their gift, their ability to feel so deeply, becomes their cage. They sense the narcissist's pain, the fragility beneath the mask, and they can't let go. To walk away feels like abandoning a wounded child, like betraying their own purpose. This is where the empath's shadow emerges, the part of them that believes their worth lies in saving others, that their goodness is measured by how much they endure. It's not just the narcissist holding them hostage, it's their own unexamined beliefs. This dynamic is a crucible, a fire that burns away illusion. The empath begins to feel the cost, not just emotionally, but physically, spiritually. Their body grows heavy, their sleep restless, their joy muted. These aren't just signs of exhaustion, they're signals from the soul, warnings that the balance has tipped too far. The empath has given what they needed most themselves: compassion, presence, boundaries. And in that giving, they've abandoned their own center. Yet, even in this pain, there's a strange alchemy at work. The more the empath gives, the more they're forced to confront their own emptiness. The narcissist, in their relentless taking, becomes a mirror not of love but of loss, showing the empath where they've betrayed themselves. The relationship, once a source of light, becomes a descent into shadow, a journey into the underworld of the psyche, where the empath must face the parts of themselves they've ignored, their anger, their needs, their right to exist without apology. This descent is not punishment, it's initiation. The empath isn't here to fix the narcissist, though they may believe they are. They're here to reclaim what they've projected outward, their power, their worth, their sovereignty. But first, they must face the pain of seeing themselves clearly. They must confront the question, why do I stay when it hurts? The answer lies not in the narcissist but in the empath's own story, in the wounds they've carried since before they knew what a wound was. The narcissist, in their refusal to change, becomes the catalyst for the empath's awakening. They hold up a mirror, not of flattery now, but of truth. And in that truth, painful as it is, lies the seed of freedom. The empath must choose, to keep pouring themselves into a void that will never fill, or to turn inward and begin the sacred work of reclaiming their own soul. The world feels heavier now, doesn't it? Like a fog that settles in your chest, blurring the edges of who you thought you were. For the empath, this is the descent, the moment when the glow of hope fades, and the truth of the bond with the narcissist begins to reveal itself, not as love, but as a mirror to their own unhealed wounds. This isn't a moment of defeat, though it feels like it. It's the psyche's invitation to dive into the underworld, where the soul's whispers grow louder than the narcissist's demands. The empath, by now, is exhausted. They've poured their essence into the narcissist, believing that love, if pure enough, can mend what's broken. They've adjusted, dimmed, reshaped themselves to fit the narcissist's needs, hoping to recapture that early spark when everything felt possible. But the narcissist's hunger only grows, their criticism sharper, their affection more conditional. The empath feels it, the slow erosion of their spirit, the way their own voice grows quiet, drowned out by the need to please, to fix, to save. And yet, they stay. Why? Because the wound is familiar. It's not just the narcissist they're holding on to, it's a story they've been telling themselves for years, maybe lifetimes. This story is rooted in the empath's shadow, the parts of themselves they've pushed away. The empath, so skilled at feeling others' pain, often denies their own. They've learned to equate love with sacrifice, to believe that their worth lies in how much they can give without asking for anything in return. This isn't just kindness, it's a distortion, a belief that their needs are less valid, that their boundaries are selfish. And the narcissist, with their endless demands, becomes the perfect stage for this belief to play out. They don't just take, they amplify the empath's own self-betrayal. The descent is painful because it forces the empath to see this truth. The narcissist isn't the source of their suffering, they're the reflection of it. Every time the empath bends, every time they silence their own needs, they're reenacting an old wound, a moment from childhood, perhaps, when love was earned through pleasing others, or when standing up for themselves felt too dangerous. The narcissist, in their refusal to reciprocate, mirrors this wound back, not to heal it but to expose it. The empath's exhaustion, their anxiety, their creeping sense of hollowness, these are not weaknesses but messengers, signaling that the soul is crying out for balance. This is where the underworld opens up. In myth, the descent into the underworld is never just about suffering, it's about transformation. The empath, in their pain, begins to encounter their shadow, the parts of themselves they've exiled. Their anger, long suppressed, bubbles up. Their need for boundaries, once dismissed as selfish, demands to be heard. Their desire to be seen, not as a savior but as a whole person, grows insistent. These are not flaws, they're fragments of the self, waiting to be reclaimed. But to claim them, the empath must face the guilt that comes with saying no, with stepping away, with choosing themselves. Guilt is the empath's greatest hurdle. To walk away from the narcissist feels like abandoning a sacred duty, like betraying the archetype of the healer they've carried for so long. But this guilt is a lie, a remnant of the old story that says their worth depends on saving others. The narcissist, in their refusal to change, is not the empath's failure, they're the empath's teacher, showing them where their boundaries were never drawn, where their light was given away too freely. The descent, then, is not about fixing the narcissist but about facing the empath's own shadow, the part of them that believed they had to earn love through self-erasure. In this dark night of the soul, something shifts. The empath begins to hear a new voice, faint at first, but undeniable. It's not the narcissist's voice, not the world's, not even the old stories. It's the soul, whispering a truth so simple it's almost unbearable: you are enough. Not because of what you give, but because of who you are. This is the turning point, the moment when the empath begins to see the narcissist not as their purpose but as their mirror, a reflection of what they've yet to claim within themselves. The descent is not the end, it's the crucible. The pain, the confusion, the loss, they're all part of the alchemy, burning away the illusions that kept the empath tethered to the narcissist. In this fire, the empath begins to forge something new, not a role, not a mask, but a self, whole and unapologetic. The question now is not how to save the narcissist, but how to save themselves. And that answer lies in the courage to turn inward, to face the shadow, and to begin the sacred work of reclamation. The air is still now, but it hums with a quiet intensity, like the moment before a storm breaks. The empath stands at the edge of their own underworld, their heart heavy with the weight of truths they can no longer ignore. The narcissist, once a beacon of hope, now looms as a shadow, a reminder of how far the empath has strayed from their own center. This is the crucible, the moment when the pain of staying becomes greater than the fear of leaving, and the soul demands reckoning. It's not about escaping the narcissist, it's about escaping the story that binds the empath to them. In this moment, the empath begins to see the narcissist clearly, not as a villain, not as a savior, but as a mirror of their own unhealed wounds. The narcissist's demands, their coldness, their endless need for validation, they're not personal. They're the narcissist's own shadow, calcified into a fortress of control. But the empath's role in this dance is just as telling. They've been complicit, not out of weakness but out of a deep, unconscious belief that love means sacrifice, that their light exists to illuminate others. This belief, once invisible, now burns in the open, and it hurts to look at it. The crucible is where the empath faces their own complicity. They've given too much, not just to the narcissist but to the archetype they've embodied, the savior, the martyr, the one who heals at the cost of themselves. This role, noble as it seems, is a trap. It's kept the empath tethered to a cycle of self-betrayal, where their worth is measured by how much they can endure. But the soul doesn't thrive on endurance, it thrives on truth. And the truth is stark: the empath cannot heal the narcissist, not because they lack love, but because the narcissist's healing is not their task. Their task is to heal themselves. This realization is both shattering and liberating. The empath begins to feel the weight of their own needs, long buried under the compulsion to give. They notice the anger they've suppressed, the boundaries they've let crumble, the voice they've silenced to keep the peace. These aren't flaws to be ashamed of, they're fragments of the self, waiting to be woven back into wholeness. But to reclaim them, the empath must confront the fear that's kept them bound, the fear of being selfish, of being unloved, of being alone. This fear is the narcissist's greatest weapon, though they wield it unconsciously. The narcissist thrives on the empath's need to be needed, their terror of abandonment. Every time the empath hesitates to leave, every time they swallow their own pain to appease, they feed this dynamic. But in the crucible, the empath begins to see this fear for what it is, not a truth, but a story. And stories can be rewritten. The act of saying no, of setting a boundary, of choosing themselves, it's not cruelty, it's resurrection. It's the soul claiming its right to exist. This is where the alchemy happens. The pain of the descent, the exhaustion, the confusion, they're not just symptoms, they're fire, burning away the illusions that kept the empath small. In this fire, the empath begins to forge a new self, one that doesn't need to save others to feel whole. They start to ask questions they've avoided. What do I want? What do I need? Where have I abandoned myself? These questions are radical, not because they're selfish, but because they shift the center of gravity from the narcissist back to the empath's own soul. The narcissist, sensing this shift, may double down. They may charm, manipulate, or accuse, trying to pull the empath back into the old dance. But the empath, now awakening, begins to see through the mask. They notice the energy, not just the words. They feel the pull, but they don't merge with it. This is the moment of individuation, the process of becoming whole, not by fixing others but by claiming every part of themselves, even the messy, angry, imperfect parts. Individuation is not about becoming perfect, it's about becoming real. The empath starts to set boundaries, not as walls but as declarations of selfhood. They say no, not to punish, but to protect their own light. They step back, not to abandon, but to reclaim. And in this stepping back, they begin to feel something new, not the hollow ache of giving too much, but the quiet strength of standing in their own truth. The narcissist, once a towering figure, starts to shrink, not because they've changed, but because the empath's lens has. This awakening is not the end of the journey, but it's the turning point. The empath is no longer a vessel for someone else's shadow, they're a flame, burning bright with their own essence. The question now is not how to fix the narcissist, but how to live as this new self, whole, sovereign, and unafraid to shine. The world feels different now, like a room after the curtains are drawn and light spills in. The empath stands on the threshold of their own awakening, their heart still tender but no longer bleeding for someone else's wounds. The narcissist, once a magnetic force, begins to lose their pull, not because they've changed, but because the empath has. This is the moment the spell begins to break, not with a dramatic clash but with a quiet shift, like a river finding a new path. The empath is no longer chasing a mirage, they're turning toward their own truth. This breaking isn't about walking away physically, though that may come. It's about an inner severance, a refusal to keep feeding the dynamic that's drained them for so long. The empath starts to see the narcissist not as their purpose or their puzzle to solve, but as a mirror of their own unclaimed power. Every moment they spent giving, adjusting, shrinking, it wasn't just about the narcissist, it was about a deeper belief that their light was only valid when it served someone else. That belief, that spell, is what's unraveling now. The process is raw, often painful. The empath must face the grief of letting go, not just of the narcissist, but of the role they've played for so long. The savior, the healer, the one who fixes through love, these are archetypes they've worn like a second skin, and shedding them feels like losing a piece of themselves. But it's not loss, it's liberation. The empath begins to forgive themselves, not for failing the narcissist, but for abandoning their own soul. This forgiveness is radical, it's not about excusing the past but about releasing the shame that kept them tethered to it. In this moment, the empath encounters their shadow in its fullest form. They see the part of themselves that craved being needed, that mistook manipulation for connection, that believed love required self-erasure. This shadow isn't a flaw, it's a teacher. It shows the empath where they've given away their power, where they've let fear of rejection dictate their choices. And in facing it, they begin to reclaim what was lost, not through anger or blame, but through compassion for the self they once silenced. The narcissist, sensing this shift, may try to pull the empath back. They might offer glimpses of the old charm, promises of change, or even guilt trips cloaked in vulnerability. But the empath, now waking, feels the difference. Their body knows before their mind does, the tightness in their chest, the unease in their gut. These are no longer signs to ignore but signals to trust. The empath begins to listen to their own instincts, to honor their own energy. They say no, not to wound, but to protect. They step back, not to punish, but to preserve. This is the alchemy of individuation, the transformation of the self through the fire of self-awareness. The empath starts to draw boundaries, not as walls to keep others out, but as sacred lines that define their own space. They begin to give from fullness, not depletion, to love from wholeness, not need. And in this shift, the narcissist's power dissolves. Not because they've been defeated, but because the empath no longer needs them to feel whole. The dynamic, once a magnetic trap, begins to fade like a dream at dawn. Yet, this breaking is not without its tests. The narcissist may return, cloaked in new words, mirroring the empath's growth with spiritual platitudes or feigned humility. This is the final ghost at the threshold, the last temptation to fall back into the old dance. But the empath, now rooted in their own truth, sees through the illusion. They trust their body's wisdom, their soul's clarity. They don't argue or explain, they simply walk away, not with bitterness, but with peace. In this moment, the empath begins to create from within. Their energy, once poured outward, now fuels their own dreams, their own healing. They laugh again, not to please, but because joy rises naturally. Their body, once tense with vigilance, softens. Their heart, once heavy with guilt, lightens. This is not the end of pain, but the end of suffering as identity. The empath is no longer defined by their wounds, they're defined by their sovereignty, their presence, their quiet power. The spell breaks not because the narcissist changes, but because the empath does. They've walked through the underworld, faced their shadow, and emerged not as a savior, but as a self, whole, unapologetic, and free. The narcissist, once a towering figure, becomes just a person, flawed and human, no longer the keeper of the empath's worth. And in this breaking, the empath finds something sacred, the courage to love themselves as fiercely as they once loved another. The fog has lifted, and the world feels sharp, alive, as if every color carries a pulse. The empath stands now, not at the edge of a wound, but at the center of their own being. The narcissist, once a mirror of their deepest fears, has faded into the background, not gone, perhaps, but no longer the axis of their universe. This is the birth of the sovereign self, the moment when the empath steps out of the old story and into a new one, written not in sacrifice but in truth. This is not the end of the journey, but the beginning of a life rooted in wholeness. Sovereignty is not about dominance or isolation, it's about presence. The empath, now individuated, no longer seeks validation in the eyes of others. They've reclaimed the parts of themselves they once gave away, their voice, their boundaries, their right to exist without apology. This reclamation is not loud or triumphant, it's quiet, like the steady rhythm of a heart that knows its own worth. The empath no longer needs to be needed, they need only to be. This new self is not perfect, nor does it pretend to be. The empath still feels deeply, still carries the gift of sensing the world's unspoken pain. But now, they wield this gift with discernment. They give, not to fill a void, but from a place of fullness. They love, not to earn belonging, but because their heart is free to choose. The narcissist, once a magnet for their light, no longer holds power over them, not because the narcissist has changed, but because the empath has. The wound that drew them together has been met, not with more sacrifice, but with healing. This healing is not a destination, it's a practice. The empath learns to listen to their body, to trust the signals that once warned them of imbalance, the knot in their stomach, the weight in their chest. These are no longer symptoms to ignore but guides, pointing toward truth. They set boundaries, not to punish, but to honor their own space. They say no, not to reject, but to affirm their own yes. And in this practice, they begin to attract something new, not narcissists, but mirrors of their own sovereignty, souls who reflect not need but authenticity. The world is still full of narcissists, of course. They'll appear, perhaps, with new masks, spiritual rhetoric, promises of growth, or subtle manipulations dressed as love. But the empath, now awake, sees them clearly. They feel the energy beneath the words, the pull beneath the charm. They don't fight or flee, they simply step away, rooted in their own gravity. The narcissist, once a teacher in pain, becomes a ghost, a reminder of the past, but no longer a force in the present. In this sovereignty, the empath begins to create. Art flows where guilt once stagnated. Silence heals where chaos once reigned. The body, once a vessel for others' pain, becomes a home for their own spirit. Laughter returns, not the nervous kind, but the kind that bubbles up from a soul at peace. This is the alchemy's final gift, not the transformation of the narcissist, but the transformation of the empath into someone who no longer needs to save or be saved. Picture this, a figure stands at the edge of a lake, the water still, reflecting a low-hanging moon. They're alone, but not lonely. The ghosts of old roles, the savior, the martyr, hover briefly, then dissolve. The empath places a hand on their heart, not to soothe but to remember, this is who I am, not who I was told to be. The cycle ends here, not with a battle, but with a quiet act of presence. The narcissist was not their punishment, they were their initiation, a painful but sacred doorway to the self. And so, the empath walks forward, not looking back. They carry no explanations, no need to justify their freedom. They move with a rhythm that's theirs alone, a fire in their eyes that doesn't need applause to burn. This is the love that releases, the love that says, I will not lose myself to keep you. It's the love of the self, fierce and unapologetic, that becomes the foundation for all other loves. If you're hearing this, feel the stir in your chest, the whisper in your bones. The pattern ends with you. You were not born to dim your light so another could shine. You were not made to carry someone else's shadow. You are the storm and the stillness, the wound and the healing. Your freedom begins when you stop seeking love as a reward and start embodying it as your essence. This is individuation. This is the end of the trance. And this, dear soul, is just the beginning.